What I show of China is what I really experience in China, and it's very different to what people in the West experience in China.
70 years ago, a small group of British businessmen travelled to China to unlock opportunities between the two countries. They became known as the icebreakers.
I think it's fantastically important to educate people about Chinese history and culture.
We have sown seeds which in China have grown to very big trees.
The values of horsemanship, respect, responsibility, compassion can be extended to all relationships.
We deserve respect, and the Chinese people with their own culture also deserve respect.
For cross-cultural understanding, I think food is a really good place to start. I hope to spread awareness of all the different cultures within China. I think there's a lot to share.
To increase understanding between cultures, the most important thing is responsibility.
Meet the bridge builders, the individuals who dare to think beyond the horizon and open up our world.
Hello and welcome to Bridge Builders, a series celebrating the lives of people who have increased understanding between China and the UK. In this programme, we meet people who have lived or worked in China and now want to share their experiences of China with the world. By forging stronger relationships between the two countries, the lives of these bridge builders can touch the lives of millions. I'm here in the heart of London, right outside the iconic St Pancras station, which is just across the road from one of Britain's most important public institutions, the British Library. Our bridge builder, Frances Wood, worked here for 3 decades, caring for some of China's most important literary treasures. Alongside her extensive study of Chinese literature, she's also written many books on Chinese culture.
I first thought about Chinese when I was at school. I come from a family of linguists, if you like, and I have to say, from the moment I began, I've just loved it. It's the most fascinating language. Chinese has just been an endless wonder for me. When I graduated, my grandmother died and left me a little bit of money, I think £250 or something like that. I was able to spend it on going to China with the first British youth delegation since the beginning of the Cultural Revolution. Knowing a little bit of Chinese was a wonderful opening for me. And then in 1975, I took the opportunity to go back to China for a year. In the early 1970s, China was still an incredibly poor country. You could wake up in the middle of the night in the Peking Hotel, look out of the window and see flocks of sheep being driven along Chang'anjie. It was a very different place. The greatest change has been the extraordinary development of China, the amazing rise in living standards of most Chinese people. And that's fantastic. After a year spent in China, improving my language, I got the opportunity to work in the British Library, which was a chance really to handle the nation's most important Chinese collections.
When Frances Wood returned to the UK, she decided to dedicate her life to Chinese literature and cultural artefacts. There are many such treasures housed in Britain, but she was particularly interested in the materials brought back from Dunhuang.
The great Dunhuang collection, the great mass of material that had been brought back by Aurel Stein from Dunhuang. I think it's very difficult for people to understand how amazing Dunhuang is. In this tiny cave, you have the world's earliest paper archive. I mean, these are papers that were made maybe 500, 600 years before Europe had even sniffed at paper, had even heard of paper. And it's massively important for Chinese history because it tells us everything that we ever needed to know about the Silk Road and China's communication with the outside world. The Diamond Sutra is certainly the most important printed object in the entire world. If you think of what people say about, the advent of printing, the importance of printing, what print has meant to us, the Diamond Sutra marks step 1 on that road, and it is a very beautiful item as well. I mean, both of those aspects, paper and printing, are Chinese firsts and deserve to be celebrated. That material in particular really was crying out for work. I suppose I led the charge in finding money and finding help. Over a period of about 5 years, we had Chinese conservators coming. What they would do was very gently flatten out these paper pieces, and then they were eventually what we called encapsulated. We ended up with an extra 14,000 items added to the collection, all of which can now be seen. The whole project of bringing Chinese conservators over, welcoming Chinese cataloguers, is the thing that I'm most proud of in the library.
The diamond Sutra is a great Chinese cultural relic that has spent a century housed on the other side of the world. It's much missed back in its homeland, as many in China are unable to see or study this amazing historical treasure.
If the Diamond Sutra was returned to China, I would be delighted. I've had the privilege of being close to it, well, for about 30 years, and to know it very well and to have watched its restoration by our conservators. And I think we can feel a pride that it's been beautifully treated in the UK. So I think we could be quite proud in handing it back to China and say, look, this we have looked after very well. I think it's fantastically important to educate British people about Chinese history and culture, because China is there, because China is important, because we ought to try and understand, but also because if they're anything like me at all, they will just find it so endlessly interesting. We deserve respect, and the Chinese people with their own culture also deserve respect. And I think the more you learn about a different culture, the better both sides are. Understanding and empathy are absolutely essential to the human experience. We are all exactly the same when it comes to kind of utterly basic feelings, and what we have that is different is cultural. Just to see the difference that culture makes is absolutely fascinating. There are difficulties sometimes in understanding where cultural matters come up against cultural matters, and the only thing a bridge builder can do is just to point out how easy it is to get across this point. Just helping people to see that there's nothing to be afraid of.
This is Kensington, one of London's most desirable areas, but even so, a lot of space here is dedicated to horses, which play an important part in British life. And it's also something our next bridge builder would definitely sympathise with. Born to a Chinese father and an English mother, he spent much of his early life in Hong Kong and Beijing, where his mother passed on her love of horsemanship to her son. Hua Tian grew up to be an Olympic events rider and dedicated much of his work to rekindling China's relationship with the horse.
I'm a Chinese Olympic event rider. I've competed at 3 Olympic Games, Beijing, Rio, and just the recent Tokyo, as well as 2 Asian Games medals. My father's Chinese, but my mother's British, so I come from a dual heritage background. My father grew up as an only son with 4 sisters and met my British mother at the Canton Fair. My mum did Chinese at university here in the UK, went out to Hong Kong to work, and their relationship developed as China opened up. I think I could definitely say any ambition I have has probably come from my Chinese roots. Culturally, Chinese parents are always very ambitious for their children, and my father certainly is. My mum came from a very traditionally British horsey family. Growing up in Beijing, I spent most afternoons with my mum at the stables, starting to ride when I was 4 years old. So for me, it was a very, very horsey upbringing, just in lots of different parts of the world.
Hwartien moved to the UK for his secondary education, where he attended Eton College, but a place at a top university was put on hold when he decided to ride in the Olympic Games, representing China.
Choosing to represent China at the Olympics, I guess as an alternative to riding for GB, was a very natural decision for me. I felt personally that riding for China was the right thing for me, and I was excited by the idea of riding for a country that had never had representation in that sport before. It's very difficult to understand how important the Beijing Olympics were to China, but also to Chinese people. It was perfect timing in terms of national confidence. I've never felt that sense going to other championships and other Olympics where the whole population felt like they were invested in the games themselves. And that was a very exciting thing for a young 18-year-old boy to be a part of.
Alex spends a lot of time and effort building trust with some very demanding personalities, his horses.
There are endless challenges of working with horses. You're working with big, powerful, emotional animals that have over millions of years evolved to run away from you. And somehow you have to work with them day in, day out, trust one another to a point where you're able to challenge yourselves as a partnership. Come on. You're looking for that perfect moment of partnership. That sense and feeling of having this big, powerful animal working with you to achieve your joint goals is incredible.
Equestrian sports are still a niche hobby in China, but Alex hopes to change that. He wants to bring horsemanship back into the mainstream and introduce a new generation of Chinese children to the joys of working with horses.
China has a huge history and connection with the horse that we've lost, that we have an opportunity to regain. But also for modern Chinese society, for myself, growing up with horses as a child, I understand what it's given me in terms of character education, in terms of opportunities. We have the horsemanship program, which gives children from all backgrounds an opportunity to meet horses and to understand what the values of equestrian sport and equestrianism is all about. It's about the respect, responsibility and compassion that you need to build that trust and partnership. Equestrian sports is very beautifully placed within China to be able to grow. And I think it's very important to make sure that it's sustainable, healthy growth. People and families and children understand what the sport is about.
Alex also believes the values of horsemanship can be extended to improving relationships between people and cultures too.
China is a huge, diverse, very complex, very old culture. China is developing very quickly. It is a difficult place to understand. I'm half Chinese and I don't understand it sometimes. Respect, responsibility and compassion. It's quite clear that those values are not just the values you need to develop a relationship with a horse. They're also the values behind humanity. And I think if we as a society can learn to deal with difficult issues and different cultures and people with different backgrounds in the same manner, with the respect, responsibility and compassion that you need for horsemanship, I think relationships between different cultures, different peoples, different nations will be in a very different place to where it is nowadays.
This is Kensington Gardens, and our next bridge builder knows this area well. He grew up in Britain and in the 1980s served in the Metropolitan Police, where one of his jobs was to help look after Diana, Princess of Wales, who lived here in Kensington Palace. He is Jerry Gray, and little did he know that he would spend the later part of his life in China, where he found love and adventure, travelling around the country by bike and helping fundraise to change the lives of many Chinese people. Impressed by the transformation he was witnessing, he decided to share his experience of China with the world.
My idea was to travel the world with this portable skill of teaching English. And my first job was in China. That was in 2004, and I never left. I decided that I was going to stay in Zhongshan, and I decided to go looking for a job. And I went to a language center and met the manager there, and that's Anne. She was my boss, still is. We are obviously from different cultures, but because both of us have traveled widely, both of us have experience of the other culture, I don't think it's such a broad difference. There was a bridge already there before we ever met each other. We were comfortable with each other's cultures.
Jerry and Anne started their charity work almost by accident when they hosted a Christmas party in 2004 and decided to raise money for disadvantaged children in the local province. From this, larger and more regular events were organised, including sponsored long-distance trips by bicycle, which allowed Jerry to experience all that the country had to offer and gave him access to very remote parts of China.
Our charity basically now is helping the disabled people in Zhongshan.
And the government does help disabled people, but we can add to that.
Disabled people didn't get much attention from society, so we decided to maybe focus on disabled people.
Myself and another foreign friend, an Irish guy, decided to ride to Xinjiang. When I decided to do this bike ride, I thought it might be an idea to link the two together, and it created a bit of publicity. It generated a lot of interest. So we basically traveled north from Guangdong into Hunan, into Hubei, into Shanxi, Gansu, Ningxia, and then across to Xinjiang. I had a feeling that I hadn't completed a journey, and I wanted to ride from Urumqi back to Zhongshan, and kind of encouraged me to do it. So we kind of got to the point where if I'm going to do it, let's do it together. We flew to Urumqi, had the bikes shipped to Urumqi, and then rode home. So that's a reversal of my first ride. So again, we touched the same provinces and regions. It kind of snowballed, it rolled and got bigger and bigger, and we had Zhongshan television covering us every day. They would call me in the afternoon and say, "Where are you now? How far have you come?" When we got back, we had a function, an event, and that raised a lot of money. Your walk is even more,
Me and another American girl, we walked from Zhongshan to Beijing 4.5 months, and about 2,500 kilometers. We mostly just stay in cheap hotels, camp a few times in mountain, but safe, quite safe. We didn't meet any dangerous situations, no, not at all. So far, if we count it from 2005 to now, it's more than 3 million. We collect the money, but we donate it to, to
an organisation that uses it.
Use it, yeah.
Alongside his charity work, Jerry Gray has become a blogger, sharing his everyday experiences of living in China. Having lived through a huge transformation in the fortunes and quality of life for the Chinese people, he wants to showcase the new China and highlight the similarities between the British and Chinese cultures.
The reason I started blogging was because we were locked down, and I thought, well, I'll share China. I'll share my experiences of China, and that's how it happened. I started posting photographs and stories linked to the photographs, and then I started writing articles about it. From 2015 to 2020, my Twitter site had 2 followers and 1 tweet, or maybe 2 tweets, and now it's just a shade short of 45,000 followers. I've seen lots of changes in China. When I first came here, it was almost impossible, for example, to get a coffee. And I'm a coffee addict. Pretty much everything that I used to miss, I can now find here. If you want to find out what's happening in China, ask people who are in China, with poverty alleviation, rural revitalization, incredible infrastructure in the last 5 years. We've got bridges to Hong Kong, we've got high-speed trains. All of this is in the last 5 to 10 years. So anyone who was here in the 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, the China they knew is not the China of today. And that's the most important thing that I can put across.
Westerners, they don't understand China. So I think better for them to come over and look around and have their own experience in China.
Behind me is the Albert Memorial, built by Queen Victoria to commemorate the death of her beloved Prince Albert. Our next bridge builder, Martin Gordon, lives not far from here. In the 1990s, he was looking forward to retirement with his partner after a very successful career in international banking. But in 1996, that changed when his partner died. Martin responded by creating his own memorial, the Barry and Martin's Trust, which launched a collaboration between China and the UK to prevent the spread of HIV and to care for those affected by AIDS throughout China.
I had a lot of knowledge of China over many years because it was very much part of our family background. My grandfather came out to China before the First War and worked for some years in the Dongbei in northeast China. And so we always had a very Chinese atmosphere at home. I always tried, whatever I was doing elsewhere, to maintain the links on the Chinese side, so that when China started to open up, it became possible for me to participate in it. Barry was my partner and my very good friend from 1970 onwards, and we lived in London and New York. Then, very unfortunately, he got diagnosed with HIV, and in 1996 I lost him. His death was obviously a very, very difficult thing for me to handle. Barry had said to me, "Martin, you must do something for charity." And I said that I would be interested in doing something between China and the United Kingdom on AIDS care, AIDS prevention, and so on. And with the introductions that I had, I called at the Chinese Academy of Preventive Medicine.
Martin Gordon brought to the Trust the financial, managerial and people skills he learned in international banking. Coupled with his extensive knowledge of China, it proved to be a winning formula.
The Chinese were terrified of HIV, as a lot of other people were, and didn't have a very good idea of how to handle it. When we had that first seminar in May of 1997, people came from different provinces of China. Over the following years, we brought groups of doctors and nurses, always nurses with doctors, to China to do workshops on AIDS prevention and care in numerous provinces of China. We also invited the Chinese to come to London to study at our hospitals. Way back in the year 2000, I created an annual Barry and Martin's Prize for excellence in AIDS treatment and care and education. These prize givings were extremely popular, and also we always gave the prizes where the prizes were earned. So we went to some very remote parts of China to give our prizes. It was very much reported in the local newspapers. It created centers of excellence. And the people that got our prizes over the years remained sort of very much connected with us. And 2 of them were made national model workers. When Barry was ill, it was the nurses who had the more day-to-day contact. In reaching out to sick people, the nurses have a very important role to play. And nursing in China has made terrific strides. Chinese people became very sophisticated very quickly on these subjects. And in early years, we had a lot to teach them. The Chinese understood HIV very well. Many doctors have come over and done training in America and England and around the world. You know, we learn a lot from our Chinese medical friends.
After spending decades working and travelling in China, Martin has witnessed a change in China's fortunes, a transformation in the Chinese healthcare system, and also in Chinese attitudes to HIV.
You should always build bridges with every country. And the Chinese, with their culture and their traditions, their hard work and their intelligence, it's a joy to establish relations with these people. We have sown seeds which in China have grown to very big trees. We have helped people to avoid discrimination. I couldn't have conceived at the beginning that I could have achieved anything remotely like what we have. And I think it's wonderful that we have this cooperation.
Our final bridge builder is also our youngest at just 19. Born to an English father and Bulgarian mother, Max Burns spent his first 13 years in Beijing, immersed in the culture, learning the language and loving the food. So when Max and his family moved to the British seaside town of Brighton in 2016, he found himself missing his Chinese life. So he started vlogging about it.
I started making videos shortly after moving to the UK. Foreigners try this traditional Chinese snack or guessing these lyrics or, you know, stuff like that. I think it's when lockdown hit is when my cooking videos started to become the main video idea. and making a Chinese dish at home came to mind. I can't get over how much I miss the food, because everywhere I lived, just going downstairs and the street is just full of street food, like all different restaurants and stuff, and in the UK is a lot less of that culture, and I really, really miss that. My main audience is Chinese-speaking people in either other Asian countries or China. Across all the platforms, all my accounts, I probably have over 3 million subscribers at the moment. I think people really like the family aspect of my videos, the relationship I have with my parents and my little brother, the little like jokes and stuff. And I think a big part of why the videos were successful at the beginning was because it offers a window into, you know, my family in England, my British family culture for Chinese viewers. But I'm also spreading Chinese culture through food. I got loads of support from my parents at the time because we just moved back and they didn't want me to forget my Chinese. Doing the videos helped me stay in touch with the culture and the language as well, so they were really happy for me to be doing that. I think the view of Chinese food is kind of skewed by Chinese takeaways and Chinese buffets and stuff in the UK. I know a lot of my friends, for example, or just people I speak to, their view of Chinese food isn't a very authentic view, but that's not really their fault. There's not a lot of readily available, super authentic food in the UK. Or if you go to a Chinese restaurant that does have authentic food and you're English, they'll often give you the English menu, you know, not the proper Chinese menu.
Alongside recipes and cooking techniques, Max teaches the cultural significance of various traditional Chinese dishes, including those that coincide with Chinese festivals. Inviting his new British friends to share in his videos allows him to showcase Chinese culture and improve understanding while having fun.
I've done a few different types of videos where I introduce traditional, authentic Chinese food and snacks to English people who don't know much about Chinese food, like letting them try yue bing, like traditional mooncakes. I did a video on that. I did a few videos where I have a few English people in the kitchen and I'm teaching them a proper Chinese dish. They teach you how to make your own chili bowl first. My friends and family that I show these Chinese dishes to, they often react in a way like, oh, I never realized you have to do all these steps, or, you know, this seems so complicated and stuff. For cross-cultural understanding, I think food is a really good place to start, because it's one of the most accessible ways to share culture, you know, and then through that food, you can learn a lot about a country's culture. Like through English food, you can learn a lot about, you know, how international we are. But then with Chinese food, you can learn how national it is. And everywhere you go is completely different. Each place is very true to being Chinese, you know, which is kind of like the polar opposite of the UK, where the UK kind of adopts a lot of other cultures into their cuisines.
Max is one of an increasing number of children born to parents who have embraced globalization by living and working in other countries. People like Max represent a new generation of cultural nomads who are beginning to redefine themselves.
Today I'm going to be cooking mapo tofu. When people ask me where I'm from, I kind of find it hard to answer that question, because growing up in China and now living in the UK, but also being from Bulgaria, so I've always felt a bit like, I guess you could say, a global citizen, yeah. Chinese food is my culture, so I'd like to showcase my culture to whoever wants to see it. China is massive, and there's many different styles and cuisines and cultures within China, you know. I hope to spread awareness of all the different cultures within China. I think there's a lot to share.
In this programme, we've heard from people who've taken extraordinary steps to build bridges between China and the UK. As the world continues to integrate, more and more people will find themselves living or working in cultures different to that of their parents. These people are pioneers who can increase understanding between cultures to become the bridge builders of the future.